not encouraging or advising anyone to modify their firearms. This is for entertainment and educational purposes only. What's up, everyone? This video will be a detailed look at the SIG P226 double single action trigger system and how it operates. This P226 Elite has a factory installed short reset kit in it that is comprised of a sear and a safety lever. I bought a standard sear and safety lever so I could show and explain how those two components shorten the reset. Let's get into it. This frame handily has windows on both sides so we can peek in and see what's going on, but it gets a little cluttered in there, so we'll look at how all the components interact outside the frame first, then hopefully when you'll see them inside the frame it will be a little clearer. The trigger bar pin goes through the trigger shoe above the pivot point, opposite the side that our finger pulls on. So as the trigger shoe is pulled back, the trigger bar moves forward. In single action operation, this fin on the trigger bar interacts with this projection on the sear just like this. As you pull the shoe back, the trigger bar moves forward and pulls the bottom of the sear out of engagement with the hammer. The sear is holding on to the hammer just like this. The bottom of it pivots out of the way, and that allows the hammer to rotate forward, striking the firing pin, igniting the round. The sear spring hangs out in the sear just like that, and this leg of it is pushed down underneath this hook on the ejector. And that keeps the sear pivoted into engagement with the hammer. The hammer strut contacts this little pin in the back of the hammer and pushes it up with force from the compressed mainspring, which makes it rotate forward about the hammer pin right here in the center. Here's the little tab on the trigger bar contacting that projection on the sear. When I pull the trigger, you can see that that starts pulling the sear bottom forward and out of engagement with the hammer. We can see the sear release the hammer from this side. This is the safety lever for the short reset trigger system. This pivots on the sear pin and hangs out on the right side of the sear just like this. This 90-degree hook on the trigger bar here pulls the bottom of this lever forward, and then that pivots it, and this part of it goes up and pushes the firing pin block up into the slide against spring force, disengaging it, and that allows the firing pin to go all the way forward and ignite the round. Here's the top of that safety lever right there. You can see as I'm pulling the trigger back, the trigger bar is coming forward and it is grabbing the safety lever. It's a little hard to see, but it's that piece right there. You see I'm moving the bottom of the safety lever right there below the trigger bar. Trigger bar is pulling forward on that safety lever. In double action operation, this 90-degree projection on the trigger bar grabs the hammer in this notch and pivots it back, first cocking it, then the bar falls out of the notch and it releases the hammer. During the double action pull, we can see that 90-degree projection of the trigger bar grabbing in that notch of the hammer and pulling it back and then dropping it. As the trigger bar comes forward, the trigger bar spring is pushing it up into the bottom side of the hammer pin, and this little piece of the trigger bar right here is riding on the bottom side of the hammer pin, which is guiding it slightly downward as it comes forward, which is what makes the trigger bar drop far enough to disengage from the notch in the hammer. This trigger bar spring right here is also the only trigger return spring. When the trigger bar is pushed down or when the trigger bar comes forward, it compresses this spring. You can also see while I'm doing this that as I'm pivoting the hammer, it's contacting the bottom side of the sear and actually pushing it forward out of the way. But then when I get to the end of the double action pull, this tab on the trigger bar once again contacts the sear and keeps it pulled forward out of the way. Let's look at how the disconnecting action and the reset works. So let's say I pull the trigger, it drops the hammer, round goes boom, slide travels rearward, it pushes this fin on the top of the trigger bar down. And that disengages it from the sear, which you saw pivot back into engagement with the hammer, so it can once again grab the hammer in the fully cocked position as the slide comes back forward. When in battery, this cutout in the slide is directly above this little fin that pops up off the top of the trigger bar. But as soon as the slide starts reciprocating, that fin gets pushed out of that down along this surface of the slide, which is what disconnects it from the sear. When I let the trigger forward, the trigger bar will travel back. You can see that this little tab will slide back and pop up in front of the sear again. That's the reset. Round is fired, slide starts moving rearward, it disconnects the trigger bar, recocks the hammer, slide comes back forward into battery. I start letting my finger off the trigger bar comes rearward and pops up in front of the projection on the sear once again. Let's say you pull the trigger and the round doesn't ignite, so you want to hit it again. You can do that with the double action. So here's what the double action reset looks like. Trigger bar didn't get disconnected because the slide didn't reciprocate, and you can still see that this part of the trigger bar is in front of the sear. Now, I would let my finger off the trigger, and the trigger bar is going to come all the way back until that 90-degree projection on the inside catches that notch in the hammer. That's the double action reset. Now you're ready to pull the trigger all the way through the double action pull again. This tab on the decocking lever contacts the sear right here. When you push the decocking lever down, it pivots up and it pushes the sear out of engagement with the hammer. The hammer comes forward off of its fully cocked notch and gets caught on this safety catch right here. That tab that I just showed is right there. I pull the decocker lever down and it comes up and it lifts the sear off of its perch with the hammer, and then it drops the hammer forward, and now you can see the hammer is caught on its safety catch. Why did the sear catch the hammer right here? Well, it's because our finger isn't on the trigger. We don't have the trigger pulled all the way to the rear, which pivots the sear completely out of engagement with the hammer. So it only allows the hammer to come forward to its safety catch. With the short reset sear and safety lever installed, we saw that the trigger bar directly interacts with the sear like this, and this part of the trigger bar back here pulls the safety lever forward. With the standard sear and safety lever, the trigger bar only interacts with the safety lever, just like this. And then the safety lever in turn is what pulls the sear out of engagement with the hammer. We already saw what the reset looked like with the short reset kit components installed. This little tab on the trigger bar only has to travel far back enough to pop back up in front of the sear. Pretty short, and I'm right back at the wall. With a standard sear and safety lever in there, we can see the trigger bar acting on the safety lever, pulling it forward into contact with the sear, and then it pulls the sear out of engagement with the hammer. Look how much further this tab has to travel to get back in front of that safety lever. The reset's much longer. There's more slack to pull out to bring that safety lever back into contact with the sear. Much longer, and then I have to pull that slack out to get back to the wall. I took some rough measurements in the trigger guard here at the tip of the trigger and measured a 60% reduction in reset length with the short reset trigger components. I like the trigger system in this pistol. It's quite simple, effective, and relatively easy to take apart and put back together. This pistol's reputation for durability and reliability precedes it, and I can see how this trigger system would contribute to that. Double single action with a decocker only is my favorite semi-automatic pistol trigger system. That may come as a surprise if you see how much 1911 content I put out, but it's true. I find the design and operation more fascinating from a mechanical system standpoint than single action only. I hope you have a good idea of how this trigger system operates now. I also hope I was able to clearly show how the short reset sear and safety lever reduce reset distance. The next video will show what I do to improve this trigger system and what kind of performance I'm able to get out of it. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.